It is phenomenally impressive. The same way in which a taxi driver knows instinctively every single road in your city, flamenco performers know exactly what they're playing and how long each different section has to be. It is phenomenal. Good afternoon to all my tios and tias. Welcome to the Hispanophiles podcast, Travel in Spain with only half a brain. This is the podcast where the hosts be low-key pale. I'm acting for real, those 6767. It's giving... Ostras! My name is James Boofery, and on today's episode we are going to be diving into one of my absolute passions, and that is, of course, the world of flamenco. The incredible folk music from Andalusia that is often appreciated but seldom correctly understood. We're going to be exploring the world's most captivating folk music. We're going to be learning about its troubled history, and we're going to understand its cultural relevance in the 21st century, not just in Spain, but also internationally. First of all, we of course have to start with our regular segments, and we're going to begin this week with the Spanish vocabulary of the week. And that today is the little expression, que merluzo soy. Que merluzo soy. What an idiot I am. But more literally, that translates to, I am such a hake. H-A-K-E, the fish. If you go to a Spanish restaurant, you'll often see merluza on the menu. I know, because I used to work in a Spanish restaurant. Merluza, M-E-R-L-U-Z-A. I believe the actual fish, the species, is written as feminine, merluza. But in the example in which I saw this expression written down from a colleague, que merluzo soy, he put it into the masculine, probably because he is a man. So, what an idiot I am. What a silly codhead I am. Que merluzo soy. Go and find a good opportunity to use it in your day-to-day conversations and come back and let me know how it went. Moving on to the second regular segment. That is, of course, the Spanish news story of the week. And, of course, today, once again, we are going back to football. That's football. And we're going to be going on away day to St. James's Park, or, more correctly, to St. James Park. This is the story a couple of weeks ago of a fan of FC Barcelona who bought a ticket to their away Champions League fixture against Newcastle United, but put the name St. James Park into, I guess, Google Maps, and accidentally went to the St. James Park that is in Exeter, in the southwest of England, some 600 kilometres out of his way. He apparently got there on that Tuesday night, I think it was, with the ticket, kind of sensing something wasn't right here. Why am I the only Kool-Aid in town? Got to the turnstiles, presented the ticket, at which point the staff working the gate realised what he'd done. He couldn't speak too much English, bless him. They actually presented him with a ticket so that he didn't have a completely wasted trip to the United Kingdom, but of course the guy would have been a bit gutted that he would have spent all that money and travelled all that way to go to the wrong ground. Exeter that evening were playing against Lincoln City FC, big rival of Hull City, so boo, Lincolnshire, boo, we don't care. They did win 3-0, never mind, they're probably going to get promoted this season. But that's the funny little story I heard recently. Goes to show it's good to know that not only in your country there are idiots who can't read maps and who just blindly, or I should say obediently, do what they're told. So God bless the young man. Hopefully in a few years this will just be a fun little anecdote that his mates take the piss out of him for down the pub. But there we go. Do your research, guys. Whenever you're doing any kind of international travel, trip, journey, holiday, dot the I's and cross the T's. That's all I'm going to say. And we move on to flamenco, the hypnotic, the captivating, the delightful folk music from the southwest of the country that I, ever since living there for the first time, I found myself truly enthralled by. Hearing it live, all these artists singing in a style of music that for me, to this day, is somehow so exotic and so contrary. It's an aberration from a lot of the pop music conventions that dominate global music today. And we're going to be looking at that, the structure and what the music actually is, how to understand what you're listening to and how to identify it. But furthermore, we're going to be looking at the socio-political, economic context that explain its evolution, how it came to be and what it represents today in Spain and globally. On this podcast, we are advocates for reading, and the books really do matter. 3 particular pieces of literature contributed disproportionately to this episode, and those are, number 1, The Ghosts of Spain, Travels Through a Country's Hidden Past by Giles Tremlett, published by Faber. The other was The New Spaniards by John Hooper, published by Penguin. You should have heard of Penguin. And the last one was Los Orígenes del Flamenco, Amanecer en Jerez y los Puertos by Manuel Bernal Romero, published by Editorial Renacimiento. A few provisos before we begin, a few little disclaimers. This episode will focus more on the music that belongs to the flamenco concept rather than the dance. This episode will not be comprehensive with regards to the musical canon inside flamenco. We're not going to be really anal and list every single type of flamenco song that can be sung. That's beyond the scope of this episode. And also, we will not dwell too much on the musical structure and how to play flamenco. I am expressly not qualified. I am not a musician. Music has always been a big interest to me, but I do not play music. Therefore, I'm not qualified to talk to you how to play it nor how to write it. So I hope you'll forgive me. What I can promise you is by the end of this episode, you have a better understanding of the socio-economic roots of this particular music genre. And we begin with a basic definition. What is flamenco? The Cambridge Dictionary describes it as a type of Spanish dance music or the dance performed to this music. Tragically lacking in detail, also very much, I think, passing the buck there, and also completely ignores the cultural element that is very, very important when discussing flamenco. Wikipedia described it as an art form based on the various folkloric music traditions of southern Spain, developed within the Gitano subculture of the region of Andalusia. Much better. Here we see the idea of it being a folk music rather than just dance music, which is what the Cambridge Dictionary described it as. And we also see the pertinence to a particular geographic region of Spain. My definition. Sticking my neck on the line a little bit, but I describe it as the traditional folk music of Andalusia whose origins lie in the customs of ostracized pockets of society in medieval and early modern Spain. The distinction I make from the Wikipedia definition is that I have removed the word gitano, which is the Spanish for gypsy, we'll come to that shortly, and in its place I put ostracized pockets of society in medieval and early modern Spain. Quite a catch-all term to put in there, but when we look at the history, I hope you will understand why I've decided to make that change. So we have a brief definition of flamenco. I would be honoured to provide to you a bit of vocabulary that is more or less essential to understanding flamenco and its history. Basically, a list of terms in Spanish that anybody trying to get an understanding of the music form will have to internalize and understand sooner rather than later. We start with flamenco jondo. Jondo being true, legitimate. Flamenco jondo is true flamenco, i.e. flamenco music that is not made explicitly for commercial purposes or for the charts, that type of thing. Una copla. Quite simply, a flamenco song, an individual piece of music that could be from 2 minutes, it can be 10 minutes. Una copla is a song. Un palo is a subgenre within flamenco. Un tablao. Un tablao, Tablao, is a bar inside a city. It's an urban bar specifically designed and created for playing and enjoying flamenco. It is a flamenco bar, more or less. Nowadays, the purists kind of shun tablaos, who regard the concept as something for the tourist, something for the outsider, so to speak. But in any medium to large Spanish city, you're going to find a tablao flamenco, a place where you can enjoy the art form live. If you're in a more rural setting, if you're in the countryside, you're more likely to come across una venta, which is a rural inn where flamenco is performed regularly. Now, I was not familiar with this concept until I read John Hooper's The New Spaniards once again. That's something he mentioned inside that book, an absolute classic, by the way. The next three pieces of vocabulary are all related to the performers. We have un cantaor, un bailaor, and un tocador. A cantaor is a singer, a person singing flamenco music. Un bailaor is one of the dancers. I'm sure when you conceptualize in your mind, when you imagine a flamenco performance, it is the dancer to which your attention gravitates, and often justifiably. And by process of elimination, un tocador is a musician, more specifically, a guitarist. Cantaor, bailaor, tocador, these are the three amigos that make up a band playing flamenco. Fantastically simple. You don't need much to begin playing. Here also in these 3 words we see the Andalusian dialect influencing the genre. It is very common in lots of Andalusian words. For example, hemos hablado, we have spoken, becomes hemos hablado, and the D from hablado disappears. Cantador, bailador, tocador becomes cantaor, bailaor, tocaor. Very common in Andalusian Spanish for the D to be dropped, and here we see, like I said, the regional relevance in the music genre. What comes next? Gitano. We already mentioned this. It is a gypsy, the Castilian word for a gypsy. Spain has a long-standing ethnic Roma community. That's something we're going to come on to just in a second. According to Giles Tremblay and the Ghosts of Spain, there is approximately 650,000 to 700,000 Gitanos living in Spain right now. One small note, throughout this episode I am going to be using the word Gitano more than I will do gypsy, purely because I feel like, number one, it's kind of more authentic, it's more true to the art form, more true to the literature, which even in English often prefers to use the word Gitano over gypsy, and also because I feel it allows me to speak about the topic objectively without a certain, let's call it, baggage. It feels a little bit easier for me to use the word liberally, in what is hopefully an light-hearted, entertaining podcast. I'm not trying to smack you over the head with any political ideas here. So Gitano, that's the word I'm going to use going forward instead of gypsy primarily. The next piece of vocabulary, una gitanería, is a Gitano community. Not always physical, but nowadays una gitanería is understood to be a barrio, a particular neighborhood of a city where many Gitanos live. If you're not a Gitano, you are a payo. Un payo, P-A-Y-O. This is a non-ethnic gypsy, a non-Gitano, a non-Roma in Spain. I am a payo. If you are female, you are una paya, P-A-Y-O or P-A-Y-A. A couple more concepts to discuss. Tocando palmas or tocar palmas. This is the rhythmic clapping that many of the performers, but also the audience, will often do whilst listening and performing flamenco, and the clapping specifically is designed to complement the cantaor singing and to provide a percussive backdrop. Each different style of tocar palmas is dependent on the copla and the palo in question, the song and the subgenre, and we'll come to that later. Tocando palmas, that are really, really infectious clapping that you hear alongside the vocals. 3 more to go, and these are the ones that are more abstract, these 3 pieces of vocabulary. Quejío, Q-U-E-J-I with a tilde, O. This is the expression of deep pain and despair that the cantaor is expected to convey during their flamenco performance. Quejío, it is the process whereby one lets out the pain inside in musical format. Very specific to flamenco. You don't see that in punk, for example. Juerga. Una juerga, J-U-E-R-G-A. Una juerga is essentially a party in which the participants will begin performing, singing, playing flamenco uncontrollably, and an important characteristic of juerga is that it is not planned in advance. Una juerga is something spontaneous, driven by the lust, the sudden desire to start performing in the middle of a street, in a bar, wherever it may be, maybe even in your place of work. Una juerga is an impromptu party in which the participants will begin singing and playing flamenco. If there is no flamenco, if there is no music, it cannot be considered juerga. Also, because this is a spontaneous activity, there is no clear suggestion within the word of time of day, duration, weekday. Una juerga can be whenever. It is entirely spontaneous, and it is something that needs flamenco music for it to be considered juerga. And that magical spark inside that inspires a bunch of people to begin a juerga is known in Spanish as duende. Duende, D-U-E-N-D-E, translating literally from Castilian to English as goblin. But duende in Castellano is considered the spirit inside you that lives deep within, that from time to time will manifest itself and grip your soul. And without you even making a conscious decision, it will compel you to begin singing, performing flamenco. Duende. Outside of Spain, this is not something you're going to hear of. Said to be in abundance in Sevilla, Jerez and Cádiz in the southwest of Spain. Again, we'll come to the reasons why later. And it is said that only Gitanos are able to recognise duende when they see it in people. A lot of people who, for example, are outsiders who are fans of flamenco, try to perform it, are said to do so without true duende, and it is something of an insult in certain circles. So there we go, we've got a list of vocabulary. Let's now look at the music itself. What are the main characteristics that we need to be aware of when we sit down to listen? First and foremost, let's discuss the lyrical basis, the words, the content, the things that the actual cantadores are saying. They are folk songs, primarily. I looked at the definition of a folk song. It is something not written down. It is something transmitted orally from generation to generation, from performer to performer, and its origins are often unclear. Therefore, it is correct to describe flamenco as a genre of folk music. I did have a little think to myself, is it accurate to describe it so? But it is. I took a little look in the dictionary. Therefore, the coplas, the songs, are often of unknown authorship. We don't know who originally wrote them, and by definition, they're supposed to be memorized. Flamenco is not supposed to be written down into sheet music. The performers are supposed to learn the lyrics, the melodies, the rhythms. When they tocar palmas, they have to know instinctively what type of song am I playing, and how am I supposed to... that was a terrible example, by the way, but you get my point. How am I supposed to complement the singing and the guitarist with the percussive sounds that I create using my own body? Because flamenco music is not written down, there is a fantastic opportunity during a juerga, during a performance, for performers to interpret and improvise at all the time. This is a big part of flamenco music, and therefore the artistry when performing flamenco is not to do so much with lyrical complexity or genius. It's all about performance and delivery. It's not so much about what you say, but how you say it and the passion you can convey. The coplas themselves, the lyrics of the coplas, these are not huge, enormous fables and sagas that you have to memorize and then teach to your grandson. No. Short little poems that get transmitted generation to generation, and then you find your own way to perform it. 3 to 6 lines long, very short songs, but the individual notes and syllables inside some of those words are drawn out. You essentially take one syllable of a longer word and you hold on to it, you project, you push your sound out through your mouth from the bottom of your diaphragm, and you take that one individual sound and you bring it up and down through the octaves, through the scales. You really put a lot of stress, and in that way you show off your vocal control and your ability as a cantor. That is one very distinctive element of the singing style. It's about being raw with your emotions, being honest to who you are, expressing that quejío, the despair, the pain you feel inside. You have to express your visceral emotion if you want to be considered a talented and successful flamenco performer. But what are those lyrics? What are the coplas actually talking about? Many key themes. The death of a close one, often a mother figure, that appears quite a lot in many flamenco coplas. Incarceration and the loss of freedom. Misery, torment, but also enjoying the little things, positive moments, an engagement, for example, inside your community. That can be a reason for a juerga. The return of a man from your family, of your son, of your nephew, returning from military service abroad. Many of these things are immortalized in the lyrics of many flamenco songs. And with regards to the subjects, there are some key tropes that do appear frequently within flamenco music. With regards to women, they are often mothers, prostitutes, virgins, junkies, unfaithful partners, and the men discussed in the songs, in the coplas, are often criminals, convicts, drug addicts, the downtrodden, what we'd now call incels maybe, people forgotten about, and violent aggressors, jailbirds, that type of thing. We've discussed the lyrical content, we've discussed the coplas. What about the music? Well, you only really need one individual instrument, which is an acoustic guitar. Guitars, they have lots of guitars in Spain. Flamenco, all you generally need is a guitar. You will sometimes have juergas, you will have performances where it is just the percussive noises made by hitting you and slapping your body parts and a cantor, but generally speaking, you will have a guitar alongside as well. Again, it's a very versatile instrument. Easy to carry, easy to play. Many people have access to one, not particularly expensive either to buy, which is one of the reasons why it has become such a big part of flamenco folk music. For a juerga, for a performance, one guitar is normally sufficient. You will sometimes, for example, on stage see a couple of guitarists, a couple of tocadores, but one is sufficient. You don't need more than that. Acoustic is preferred. If somebody brings out a mad axe and plugs it into an amp, it's going to give a very different sound that is not legitimate to flamenco jondo, to cante jondo, not at all. The musical structure, and this is where flamenco becomes something, I think, to many people very exotic, very almost challenging to the preconceived notions and norms of what music should be structurally. Consider a typical pop music song. The way in which it is built, the way in which a writer will create a song, they will have 4 beats or 2 beats per bar, sometimes 3, on occasion 5, which basically means bum, 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 and then again bum, 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 bum. Performers and writers tend to create their songs around that structure. A typical pop song will be split into basic sections, that being an intro, a verse, then a chorus, another verse, then the chorus again, a middle 8, then the chorus and an outro. And my understanding is that this format was largely popularised by the Beatles. In flamenco, each different balo, each different subgenre has its own structure, its own number of beats per bar. And not only that, within the same song, within the same copla, the performers can go from 3 to 7. So it'll be bum 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 bum, for example. It's an incredibly odd thing to hear to the newcomer. It can be very difficult to follow if you are an enthusiastic novice, but performers, the gitanos who play this stuff all their life, know instinctively what balo is being played and therefore how to count in their head and how to structure the singing, the music playing, the percussive actions of the body, how to base that around what they're supposed to be performing. It is phenomenally impressive. All this stuff is just the same way in which a taxi driver knows instinctively every single road in your city. Flamenco performers, cantadores, bailadores, tocadores know exactly what they're playing and how long each different section has to be. It is phenomenal. If I had to pick one, this is the feature of flamenco that makes it so exotic and compelling to foreigners, because it deliberately deviates from the tried and tested 4 beats or 2 beats per bar structure of pop music that is now globally ubiquitous. Fans of more orthodox music often don't appreciate this in it. The same way people don't like jazz, because the idea of a musician completely just going off-piste and doing whatever they like and then returning to the original basis, that they don't really like that for some reason. Because I think you go to a live performance of jazz or flamenco, that shows who the real artists are. The people who know the tempo, the key they originally started in, where the singing's going to come back in, and just with a saxophone, with a guitar, with a drum kit, just invent and explore and show their own personality. That's where I think true music mastery lies. So we have a good understanding of what a typical flamenco song will look and sound like. But what of these subgenres? Let's have a little look at some of those, and you're going to be surprised how familiar some of these names are to you. The Spanish word palo, P-A-L-O, just means a branch or a stick. So if you think of flamenco as a tree, a big strong trunk in the middle of a field, the palos are the branches coming off in all directions. Clearly, therefore, if you are visualizing that in your head, there's going to be lots of overlap. Yes, some palos point in completely different directions, but some are pointing almost in the same direction and they are next to each other, almost touching. For that reason, it can be difficult for an outsider to identify a palo. Now, I will say this, if you, and I implore you to do so, if you go on Spotify and have a little explore of flamenco, nowadays, it will be common for flamenco performers to put the name of the palo after the song title. I find that quite convenient myself when I'm exploring this stuff. Make of it what you will. Each palo is defined by the beat structure, which we already alluded to before, the key in which it is sung and performed, the mood or emotional content of the particular palo. Some are for happy and positive experiences, some are about negative emotions and tragedy, and therefore the subsequent purpose for playing. For example, at a wedding, it would not be suitable to play coplas from a particular palo, and also the geographic origin of the particular palo can be very specific. Going back to early modern Spain's imperial reach, when the Spanish Empire stretched across almost the entire world, Spain inherited a lot of musical traditions and customs from the Americas, from Africa, and from Asia, in the form of the Philippines, though admittedly to a lesser extent. There are over 50 balos. Now, we are not going to go through each one, that is beyond the scope of this episode. Furthermore, the origins of many palos have been lost to history because they were never written down or recorded, so we can only speculate where some of them come from. However, if we look at a few examples, some of these not only will be familiar to you, but it will be clear where the origin is. Starting with the fandango. This apparently is of Moorish, Arabic, Northern African origin and mentioned explicitly in Bohemian Rhapsody, a song I'm sure you're all familiar with. We have the rumba. These are typically more upbeat, often the most popular subgenre with the enthusiastic outsider like me. We have bulería, another kind of upbeat and more positive one. That appears to be my favourite palo in the flamenco world. Tango. An Argentine dance, it's also a flamenco palo. Milonga, also from Latin America. Alegría, obviously that being the Spanish word for happiness, that is clearly a positive palo for celebration. On the other side of the spectrum, solea or solear, these are sad laments. These are the more tragedy-orientated coplas. Guajira, a word commonly used in Cuba to refer to a young woman, also a flamenco copla. We have then sevillanas, seguirías, carceleras, again coplas about hardship behind bars. We have tientos, tarantos, farrucas, many exotic names. We don't know where they come from. We can speculate and have a good guess in certain instances, but this just goes to show the depth of flamenco. What about seeing this stuff live? What is a typical flamenco performance like? If you're going to go to a tablao to watch a show, it's probably going to look something like this. The venue will normally be quite small. Bigger venues, of course, are possible, but the smaller venues are considered a little bit more traditional and honest to the art form. Tablaos are often small, cosy bars. They are dark, no big stage lights, nothing like that. They're intimate. There's a small wooden stage, normally half a foot tall. No need for a microphone or amplifier normally. The power of the voice and the guitar are enough to fill the room. The performers will be on the stage, of course, with the audience in front. As we said, normally one guitarist, one tocador, is enough for the show. There'll often be a couple vocalists, a couple cantadores, and a couple bailadores, a couple dancers on stage as well. There are seldom more components, more instruments than that. It is beautiful how simple flamenco can be. The lights go down, and either the vocalist, the cantador, or the guitarist, the tocador, will begin with very slow, drawn-out notes, building suspense deliberately, making you wait for the big crescendo, the big exciting moment. After a couple of minutes, the dancer, the bailador, will get up from the seat. They will, in the same way, perform very slow, powerful, constrained movements to begin with. Normally these shows, the dancers, the bailadores, will perform solo to begin with, and then the others wait their turn. You can sometimes see bailadores dancing together, but it's kind of more, I guess, considered more respectful. You give one bailador the time in the limelight on stage, enjoying that attention, and then it's the other bailador's turn to get up and impress the audience and the other performers. As the song goes on, generally speaking, the percussion will begin. There'll be claps, they'll be tocando palmas, and stamps. Normally the bailador will stamp their foot firmly on the stage, but sometimes the cantadores and tocadores will do it as well. This clapping, tocando palmas, is often syncopated, meaning that two different people, normally the vocalist sat down, will be clapping in a way that is complementary to each other. So it sounds like, but that's actually two people clapping in spaces between each other. It's hard to describe, but when you see it performed live, you will understand, and it is incredibly impressive. Again, knowing exactly what palo they're playing and what structure the percussive elements of the song should be following. And they just know this stuff inside out. They're so fluent with it. It's incredible. The tempo will increase. The emotion intensifies with it. You see the strained expression on the face. The powerful movements become faster. Crazy twirls and spins on one foot. Huge gestures, pointing, throwing the energy toward the ceiling, throwing it toward the crowd. It's intense, it's dramatic. The palms of the bailador will be open but tense. The idea is to keep yourself elegant but express through your body the pain that you feel within, the passion that you feel within. A lot of intricate footwork and stamping. At tablao shows, at these professional performances, you will seldom see the performers smile. That is not the done thing so much. And as the performance progresses, you will begin to see improvisation. Hard to notice in a tablao, but certainly in a juerga, it is very, very present. Everybody has a go. Don't rush in if you are there. If you are in a juerga, you'll get your chance to perform. Be patient. And that alludes to another key element of flamenco performance, and this is something that you'll see at a tablao, at a professional show, or in a juerga, which is audience participation. Now, while preparing the script for this episode, I had to look up how to say heckle in Spanish. Lingua gave me back interrumpir, which I don't think is doesn't really fit the bill, doesn't quite encapsulate what is understood by the English language word heckle. Heckling, this interrumpir, is normally directed toward the bailar and cantor, but unlike stand-up comedy shows where the purpose of a heckle is to find a weakness or snap at something the comedian has said, the purpose of a heckle inside a flamenco show or a juerga is to convey how impressed you are, how much you're enjoying the music, and it is to encourage, it is to show the singer, the cantador, that you're enjoying what they're doing and to say, give me some more. The things that will be said can be quite funny. The Andalusian way of speaking, they are known for being very vulgar and quite shameless. One time when I was living in Martos during my Erasmus year, there was the local tablao that I went to a few times, and while we were listening to the cantador sing, one guy from the back of the room, old guy in his 60s, he just goes, "Oyo!" Which for fluent Spanish speakers amongst you, I don't have to tell you what that translates as, what that literally means. If you're not familiar, it is a specific part of the female anatomy, which is, if you put that into a different context, if you go to an opera show, it will be equivalent of while Luciano Pavarotti's taking a breather, someone from the back shouting, "You fuck up!" Which is absurd to think that's a way in which an audience member would encourage a performer, but welcome to Andalusia, where things are a little bit different. Let's look at the etymology, the origin of the word flamenco. Among scholars, among researchers, among fans of flamenco, there is quite a bit of debate about the actual origin of the word. It's not clear. Part of the reason why it's so unclear where flamenco comes from and what the word actually means is because the historic performers, the people performing this music in the 16th, 17th century, didn't write down what they were doing. Also, those who could read and write often would want to hide their cultural ancestry from the powers that be. Therefore, we have to guess and speculate, which of course is part of the fun. Objectively, flamenco is the Castellano word for Flemish, i.e. someone from Flanders, part of Belgium, what we now call Belgium. Is there a historic connection here? Well, Manuel Bernal Romero, one of the authors we referred to at the beginning of this episode, in his book he referred to 16th century populations of Germans and Flemish people in Andalusia. They were bandits, basically, they were outlaws. He posits the idea that the word for this ethnic group, for these people, just kind of stuck around, and it by default became part of the identity of Andalusia, and then by extension it got stuck to the performers of the folk music. It is true that Flanders, the Low Countries, were under Spanish rule in the early 1600s. Bernal Romero explains that some Gitanos from Flanders did go to reside in Spain in this era once the conflict had ended. At this time in Spain, decrees forbidding the expression of Gitano culture meant that a lot of people wanted to stop calling Gitanos and would look for other vocabulary, other vernacular to refer to them, and the idea that Bernal Romero posits is that flamenco, for Flemish, just filled that void in this area. This explanation seems a bit tenuous to me. Large-scale Flemish migration to Spain, if anything, the opposite was true. As Spain of the 17th century became increasingly politically orthodox, and during the Inquisition, when Catholic doctrine was pressed onto the people upon pain of death in many instances, the liberal cities of Antwerp and particularly Amsterdam, who had just rid themselves of Spanish rule, that is where a lot of people wishing to evade the Spanish state would flee to. So in this era, there was a far greater migration from Andalusia, from Spain, to Flanders than the other way around. For me, therefore, the fact that flamenco refers to this music and is also the Castellano demonym for Flemish, I think is nothing more than a linguistic fluke. Another common theory is that flamenco was a name for a type of utility knife used by Gitanos. I read that in a few sources, but I don't know how true that is. I also have not been able to find any kind of image, any kind of drawing or photo of said knife. But the most likely explanation, the most likely source of the word flamenco, and the one that I see referred to most frequently in literature, is the Arabic flamenco or flamengus. This is a wandering peasant or a nomadic peasant in Arabic. It is easy to see, therefore, how Gitano culture, the idea of being nomadic, would tie in with the presence of Moriscos, of the converted Arabs, the Muslims and the Jews, inside southern Spain. Another possibility is Felamangu, I think a different spelling, was a Moroccan or Berber expression for the songs of the peasants, again perfectly fitting with what we've just discussed. In the 17th century, Bernardo Romero makes this quite clear in his book, flamenco seemed to emerge as a go-to adjective to describe the Gitanos and their culture. The word became stigmatized, Gitano became stigmatized under the court of Felipe III, and many people wanted to avoid referring to it. Therefore, cante Gitano, at this era, then it became cante jondo. Fast forward to the 1850s, the word flamenco was very common in media circulation. It was used a lot in literature, in newspapers, in periodicals, and at this time it was used to imply melancholy Gitano music, not referring to Gitanos explicitly, more related to the music they were playing. But come the 1960s, we see arte flamenco being used in the media to refer to the song, dance and music together. From there, from the 1960s, we can see flamenco as the accepted word for the genre of Andalusian folk music. This section is going to be the bulk of the episode, and I kind of thought it would probably make sense to separate the history of flamenco into two different sections. The first one, early modern. The second, we're going to be discussing the post-industrial era and the history of the music form in that time. So where do we begin? We've talked about the Gitanos a lot. You cannot get far talking about the history of flamenco without talking about the Gitanos. So let's explore that just one moment. Gitanos, the Gypsies, the Roma, came from India originally. Now, in Ghost of Spain, Giles Tremlett talks about a gypsy exodus from India, from the Indian subcontinent, that lasted half a millennium. Why did they leave? Was it religious persecution? Were they pilgrims? Were they expelled by Muslim dynasties? We're not entirely sure. But by the 15th century, so the 1400s, the Gitanos had crossed the Pyrenees, and we can be sure there were Gitano populations, there were Gitanerias across the Iberian Peninsula in the 1400s. 1438, we see evidence of a Gitaneria in Jerez de la Frontera. Where did they settle? Again, they were not particularly good at writing down their own history, which is something very regrettable to this day, but we can assume they settled in coastal Spain and on the floodplains of the major rivers, those being the Ebro, the Duero, and the Guadalquivir. These would have been the easiest places to settle compared to the cold, challenging mountainous regions of the Pyrenees, of the Cantabria Mountains, of the Meseta. Come 1464, on the 14th of September, we see meeting minutes from the local council deploring mixed ethnicity celebrations, including slaves in Gitanerias in Jerez de la Frontera, that are now believed to be the barrios of San Miguel and Santiago. The response of the authorities was to prohibit gatherings of 10 or more slaves to try and avoid this. Let's consider Spain in the 1400s. It was mostly Christian by this point, very authoritarian, very little of Islamic Al-Andalus remained, confined pretty much to Granada and a couple of surrounding areas inside Andalusia. Across Christian Europe, the zeitgeist of the time was little tolerance for Jews, for Muslims. Spain embodied that like no other country in Europe in this time, and therefore the arrival of these Gitanos from India, they were shown little grace. In 1499, Ferdinand and Isabella ordered the expulsion of the Gitanos. Over the next 2 centuries, Spain becomes the dominant global power. The discovery of the Americas, They were the ones who performed the first global circumnavigation of the planet, which was the subject of episode 14 of Hispanophiles podcast, and Spain accumulated enormous wealth and military control at the expense of many other rival nations. Bolstered by their success and their global standing, Spain's leaders saw no need to change or reform internally. They saw themselves as the winners, the nation favoured by God to assume a hegemonic position in global affairs. The Inquisition, therefore, was set up to eliminate threats. Gitanos suffered as much as the Jews and the Muslims. Come 1539, Carlos V, Holy Roman Emperor, issued another decree ordering the Gitanos to get out of Spain or to accept new professions and settle within 3 months. They could no longer be nomadic. Where did they settle? One town becomes of clear interest in this part of the story, El Puerto de Santa Maria, in the Bay of Cádiz. This was the official naval base for the Spanish Royal Fleet as of 1540. Think about a naval base, what it would be like. You've got ships coming in, coming out, all sorts of related trade, creating ropes, lots of metalwork, forging, making anchors, making chains that you need, obviously for the transatlantic slave trade at that time. And also you need lots of dumb muscle to come and load up and unload boats that arrive at the same time that Gitanos were looking for work. Now, Gitano culture, for right or for wrong, tends to undervalue education to this day, and this stat comes from Giles Tremlett. 1% of Gitanos in Spain attend university. Therefore, in 1540, it's a key moment in the evolution of Gitano culture inside Spain. Cádiz province, specifically El Puerto de Santa Maria, becomes a place where the Gitanos begin to congregate and settle in large numbers. In the mid-16th century, Spain is high off its own success. Jews, Muslims, Moriscos, so the converts to Christianity who were former Muslims and Jews, all formerly lower status in society. The Gitanos joined that group. These people belonging to these communities were abused, they were mistreated, they were censored, harassed, they were given limited economic and professional opportunities, and they were placed together in certain barrios. In certain neighbourhoods of Sevilla, Cádiz, Granada, Almería, Valencia, Zaragoza, Toledo, they would be living in close quarters so that effectively they would not be disturbing the middle classes that deemed them as undesirable in many regards. Sharing spaces, sharing resources, they would naturally begin to learn from each other. And here we see cante gitano, cante jondo. This is the most likely part of history when it began to absorb elements of Morisco culture. And this is where I suspect flamenco absorbed the style of singing that is very recognisable in Arabic, Levantine, North African music to this day. The idea of taking one syllable, holding onto it, going up and down scales, and putting a lot of stress on your vocal cords as you sing it from the back of your throat. A couple of examples I think of, if you ever heard a minaret, that is a place from which an imam places the call to prayer. You hear that. You hear one syllable stressed and going through different notes up and down. That is what I recognise in flamenco music. The other pop culture go-to for this I always take is the Prince of Egypt, the DreamWorks film. One of the best animated films of all time, and in my opinion, super, super underrated. A lot of the Hebrew music that you see inside that film does the same thing. It's a woman singing with the back of her throat, but going up and down whilst playing the same syllable, the same sound. I put this era as the time when the Gitanos learnt to sing like the Moors. But then why would it become part of Gitano culture? Because they are the people of the underclasses of early modern Spain. Those are the ones to whom convivial music performances, juerga, was the most important. Of course, it's those ones doing the singing and the dancing and the performing and getting out there in the street and having a good time. The Moriscos, the Jews, the Muslims, the slaves, they were not so inclined to have that raucous impromptu party as the Gitanos were. It makes complete sense, therefore, that the Gitanos would adopt vocal styles of other ethnic groups at the time. This is why at the beginning, in my definition of flamenco, I refer to ostracized groups of early modern Spain rather than just the Gitanos themselves. The Gitanos, of course, have long had to be versatile and resourceful and malleable in order to survive some truly awful things done to them by the Spanish state. And also I think this is when the coplas, the orally transmitted folk songs of the Gitanos, began to lyrically dedicate themselves more to despair, to lament, to tragedy. It would make total sense that this would be the dawn of that style of singing as well. Flamenco coplas, many palos, deal with deep unhappiness and resent and anger very directly. We fast forward. The powers that be still persecuted Muslims, Jews and Gitanos. On the 28th of June 1619, Felipe III issued a decree ordering the Gitanos to leave, quote-unquote, our kingdoms under pain of death. Those who wished to remain had to live in settlements of over 1,000 people, and they were ordered to abandon their Gitano customs, language, and typical attire. Music performance, therefore, was clearly targeted as an outward expression of Gitano culture in this time. 1633, the same thing again, albeit under Felipe IV. There was a decree forbidding outward manifestations of Gitano culture, including Gitano names. That's one of the reasons why nowadays, like we said, Gitanos are ethnically from India. There's not like 50,000 people in Spain with the name like Patel or Singh, for example, or Segal. A lot of the Gitanos had to shed their ethnic sounding names, and it is now very common for the Gitanos to have Catholic Spanish sounding names. This decree also attempted to discourage formal use of the word Gitano by many people in the courts in positions of influence inside Spain of the 17th century. Flamenco, therefore, at this point, seems to enter the common lexicon of Spain. It's a word prescribed to Gitano culture, so as to avoid using the word Gitano, and it also was applied to their artistic endeavours, including music. This is the theory posited by Manuel Bernal Romero in Los Orígenes del Flamenco. But then elsewhere in the book, he says that in 1807, we saw the earliest written evidence of the word flamenco in place of gitano, and that apparently was in the Diario Mercantil de Cádiz on the 30th of December. Like I said, we're not trying to become flamenco historians in this episode. And then we get to 1717, and here we see quite an interesting development in the state's treatment of the Gitano people of Spain. The decree issued in this era limited Gitano residents to a list of 41 towns across Spain. The objective was to have one Gitano family per 100 residents, so as not to concentrate Gitano population, and again have them all together singing their songs and doing the dances. These towns, of course, were heavily monitored with a lot of surveillance. In 1746, 34 more towns were added to that list, and included among them was El Puerto de Santa Maria, in the Bay of Cádiz that we discussed earlier. Not long after, we see a bit of a break, a bit of respite for the Gitanos. Carlos III granted them civil rights to be citizens of Spain. He gave them legally recognised status and a great deal more rights that they could enjoy and employ. At the end of the 18th century, a census taken indicated that 16.5% of Gitanos living in Spain were in Cádiz province. But now, as they were able to live wherever they like, they no longer needed to cluster in specific designated towns. So where did they go next? It seems to be that they chose sites close by, notably Cádiz, Sevilla and Jerez de la Frontera. Why these towns? Why these cities? Cádiz and Sevilla have two things in common. These were key areas of governance and administration of Spain's colonial efforts in the Americas. Now, both have port facilities where valuable commodities and goods coming in from the Americas would be accounted for and stored in large repositories there. The related trades, packing and unpacking galleons, storing these commodities that could otherwise spoil very quickly, being a broker, finding buyers for X tons of tobacco, and therefore using informal networks you have at your disposal, metalwork, forging, rope creation. Yes, the sailors, administrators and financiers of colonial missions, they were from all across the Iberian Peninsula, but the people doing the hard work, the financiers, the managers, needed dumb, low-skilled muscle. People could do manual work, available on short term. If they had to, say, be there at 10 a.m. tomorrow, they could do it. And people prepared to do dangerous and or unpleasant jobs. In the 18th century, the Gitanos, recently given more rights, fit the bill perfectly. As we discussed, Gitanos having, generally speaking, less educational attainment meant that the more desirable professions were out of reach to them. More importantly, however, employers who needed hands quickly, who needed labour on short notice, could not afford to be picky or shun anybody on the basis of their ethnicity. There was no time to ask questions. They just needed takers for the jobs as quickly as possible. The Gitanos benefited massively from this demand of labour in these places, in Cádiz and Sevilla. The famous gitanerías, therefore, of Cádiz and Sevilla exploded at this time. Triana, on the other side of the Guadalquivir from Sevilla, is the best example of this, even though it is now largely gentrified. The other place we discussed, Jerez de la Frontera, Gitanos found the same opportunity to work, but in a different industry, that being the bodegas, the sherry factories. Now, we did an episode dedicated to sherry in episode 27 of the Hispanophiles podcast. Sherry wine, synonymous with colony, with empire. It is fortified, therefore it is more protected against bacteria. It lasts longer and therefore is favourable on long voyages. But who's going to pick your grapes at harvest? It was attractive, easy work for Gitanos. Long days in the field, away from urban centres, away from the payos, from the police, from the authorities. And there's incredible folklore stories of long, undisturbed juergas in the middle of the vineyard at midnight in August. Plus, the superior horsemanship of Gitanos gave them a competitive advantage in terms of loading up the carts with grapes and getting them to the bodega as quickly as possible. Also, glass manufacture for bottles admittedly came a little bit later, but if you can imagine a place where you're making glass bottles, it is hot, it is uncomfortable, you have to be fast, you have to be quick, it is loud, it is manual. Another profession that the Gitanos, who couldn't have access to more, let's say, esteemed jobs, for right or wrong, it is something they could do and where demand for labour was present. So we see from El Puerto de Santa Maria, gitanerías appearing in Jerez de la Frontera, in Cádiz and Sevilla. Other towns nearby, Écija, Lebrija, Ronda, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, San Fernando, Utrera, all around this area known as Baja Andalucía. The towns along the Guadalquivir, the vineyards of Cádiz province, and the port around the bay. It is this moment when cante flamenco, cante gitano, cante jondo begins to spread across Baja Andalucía, and to this day we associate this region of Spain with the music genre. Therefore, in spite of notable Morisco populations in Valencia, Zaragoza, Toledo, Tortosa in this time, it was the Gitanos, now with greater civil rights and access to opportunities in Spain, who gravitated to these areas because suitable work was more available there. To this day, flamenco is synonymous with this part of the country. Okay, so we've looked at the early modern era of flamenco in Spain. Now let's go to the post-industrial era. Let's consider Spain in the 18th and 19th centuries for a second. We see the War of Spanish Succession. We see the Napoleonic Wars across Europe, which affected Spain very directly. We had the Peninsular War in the 19th century, then we had the Latin American Wars for independence. We see two Carlist civil wars that were incredibly destructive, incredibly bloody in the 19th century. The First Spanish Republic at the end of that century, the dawn of partisan politics splitting Spanish society, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, not affecting the country uniformly. Catalonia and Biscay province were the ones more touched by industrialization than anywhere else in the country. The cultural and demographic changes across the country were enormous, and for the first time ever in Spain, we see the emergence of urban middle classes with money to spend. Entertainment naturally flourished, and the enterprising, versatile Gitanos filled the void. Bernal Romero stated the 1860s as the birth of flamenco as a spectacle, as something to go, sit down and enjoy for the purpose of entertainment as an outsider, not being part of a juerga, not contributing, but sitting and consuming flamenco. The 1860s, this is when this first happened, and it came in the form of what was known as a café cantante, a singing cafe. Basically, raucous flamenco jondo or cante gitano was performed to live audiences who are mostly payo, who are mostly non-gitano, by the Gitanos, who of course by now had 2 centuries worth of coplas in their repertoire to be able to perform to people to whom it was something incredibly exciting, but also accessible and affordable. In this era, we also see the emergence of what was known as opera flamenca, basically flamenco in the opera format. Nowadays, however, often seen by purists as something of a bastardized, watered-down form of the arts for the socialite classes, basically. Let's also consider this is the romantic era of literature. The drama that came with cante, jondo and flamenco made it appealing outside of gitanerias for the first time considerably and internationally. 19th century Spain, the Anglo-Saxons, the Germans, the Scandinavian people, Spain was seen, what's often referred to as the Black Legend, it was seen in the Protestant countries as a place of wild, untamed emotion, of cruelty, of neglect of the working classes on behalf of the state, on behalf of the authorities, and a place of dangerous conflict. Again, part of that is entirely warranted, how violent much of Spain was in the 19th century. But as a consequence of the lust for romantic literature, a lot of Brits, Germans, Norwegians, Dutch speakers, Poles wanted to come and see Spain. Flamenco was also to them an exotic thrill, something entirely foreign to them, entirely new. It ticked a lot of cliche boxes about what they expected in this dangerous, lively, exotic Spain. So now flamenco has become something to go and see. It has become entertainment. It has become something that you can consume. The late 19th century and the first couple of decades of the 20th century is considered by many to be the golden age of flamenco. It is in this era, and toward the end of that era, when we see the establishment of many concursos, of many contests for flamenco performers that run to this day. These concursos, these competitions, have proven fantastically popular with performers, with consumers of the music as well, but also they've done much to enhance the prestige of the art form and, I would say, to legitimise it. Again, winning a prize, winning a contest is a big deal for anybody. It has given it that gravitas, the idea that it is something in which you can excel, in which you can be more than just, and this is how many people saw it, be more than just a drunkard lamenting the loss of your mother or the fact that your wife cheated on you and indulging yourself in rum. This era was really when it became a lot more prestigious, I would use that word. The 13th, 14th of June 1922, this was when the primer concurso de cante jondo de Granada took place. The contemporary press of the day say that about 4,000 spectators showed up to watch it, which is a huge number. Journalists and academics took notice for the first time. The Centro Artístico de Granada earned 30,000 pesetas from the event, but it was not considered professional at this stage. Professional musicians were excluded from the event. However, the winner, Manolito Ortega, was from a family of professional trained musicians, so I'm not entirely sure what to believe. This is what I've read. In 1954, the tablaos began to open, basically a reincarnation of the Café Cantante, a place designed specifically for people to perform flamenco and to go and enjoy it. They started in Andalusia, in Cádiz, in Sevilla, in Málaga, in Granada, in Córdoba, and they spread outward. In 1956, Córdoba got its own flamenco festival. In September 1958, in Jerez de la Frontera, Juan de la Plata, Manuel Pérez Celdrán, Manuel Ríos Ruiz, and Esteban Pino Romero founded the Cátedra de Flamencología. Basically, a single body to protect and define flamenco, with spaces for performers, with resources, places they could go and learn and practice. And the express objective of the Cátedra was to centralise the efforts made to preserve and promote the ancestral traditions of this art form. And basically an authority that could say what is and what is not flamenco, and also, and this is where we owe much gratitude to these people, a body that could investigate the cultural heritage and history of flamenco. We're in the 1950s. What else was happening in Spain in that period? Of course, it was a dictatorship under the Falangist regime of General Francisco Franco. The 50s and 60s were the años de hambre, the years of hunger, in which poor planning and economic isolation from the developing world put Spain at a disadvantage, and there was a lot of starvation, most acutely felt in the south, and as a consequence, a lot of people from Murcia, Andalusia, Extremadura migrated. They left for other parts of the country, and with them brought flamenco. As of the 60s, tablaos opened in Catalonia, Madrid, Valencia, Asturias, El País Vasco, Aragon. These places were introduced to cante jondo, cante gitano for the very first time. Generally speaking, the Franco regime didn't like flamenco. His ideology, Catholicism, was a key pillar of the way in which he saw the idealized Spanish state, and the idea of this combined Morisco-Gitano cultural celebration taking any kind of prominence inside his realm did not appeal to him whatsoever. But in the final 10 years of his reign prior to his death in 1975, growing discontent across the nation, student protests, the regime struggled to contain them, and gradually there were concessions made to the people to give them a greater degree of freedom. Obviously, there was a lot of censorship still being employed, but there were greater civil liberties being applied, and flamenco became more commonplace across the country. This is the nascent era of modern flamenco. Spain began to embrace it more and more as our national folk music. Then, the 80s, Spain opens up politically and economically to the wider world. The censorship disappears. The economy booms. There is trade with almost every country in the world looking to sell something. Flamenco performers for the first time become international stars. They benefit financially from this new era, this new dawn. However, one new thing found itself a fixation of many Gitanos and a scourge of the Gitano community: heroin. In the 1980s, a heroin epidemic battered, it obliterated, it did much damage to the Gitano community of Spain, the effects of which are still being felt to this day. The average life expectancy of a Gitano today in Spain, compared to his Bayo counterpart, is 10 years younger. The average Spaniard lives to 84. The Gitano will get to 74 on average. That comes from Giles Tremlett's book, The Ghosts of Spain. Evangelism has become something of a saviour to many Gitanos. About 15% of the Gitano population of Spain are practicing evangelists. And as flamenco found a global market, as profits came in, as record contracts and global tours became more commonplace, the geographical shift of pure flamenco, flamenco jondo, moved away from Jerez de la Frontera and to now a neighbourhood in Sevilla called Las 3,000 Viviendas. In the words of Giles Tremlett, Las 3,000 Viviendas can now claim to be the repository of that tradition. A neglected working class part of town in the south of Seville that is not the type of place that many foreigners are going to want to go and visit, but Las 3,000 is now the most prominent gitaneria of all the country. In The New Spaniards, John Hooper looked at the 12th Flamenco Bienal in Sevilla in 2002, and apparently, of all the spectators, of all the attendees, 19% were from North America, 11% from Germany, 14% from Japan, and fewer than 1/4 of those attending were Spanish. This tells you how much flamenco has become an international music phenomenon from the barrios, from the gitanerias of Andalusia. Many performers nowadays, they are barrios, they're not gitanos. You don't have to be gitano to be a good flamenco performer, neither to be successful in the realm, but the gitanos still do take centre stage in flamenco, in the music form. And now UNESCO thankfully recognises flamenco as a world intangible cultural heritage. It has gone from El Puerto de Santa Maria to the entire world. Now that we know what flamenco is, whilst I was writing this script for this episode, one thing struck me really clearly, which is there exist many cultural parallels to another major influential music genre of our time. I know I don't look or sound like it, but I am a big fan of hip-hop. I always have been, and flamenco and hip-hop undeniably share some key characteristics. Very few resources are needed. Both music genres are born of ingenuity, using very little, using what you have available. In the case of hip-hop, turntables, your parents' records, and a microphone is basically all you need. That's the way it was in Brooklyn, in Queens in the 1980s. In the case of flamenco, a single guitar, your feet, your hands, and your throat, and you have enough to be a performer. People making both music genres, there's a distrust of academia, of education, of the classical correct way to perform music. If you are someone studying music, and then if you go and apply your knowledge learnt through university at these events, you are shunned, you are considered an outsider. Instead, musical improvisation, using your wit, is preferred, and this is what we call freestyling. That receives way more praise in both instances. The lyrical content, both music genres often display loyalty to rough working-class neighbourhoods that often form a big part of the singer's identity. Both hip-hop artists and flamenco artists like to give themselves ridiculous, cheeky monikers and stage names. Their live performances feature a raucous crowd encouraged to vocalise opinions and shout out wherever possible. And also, in both flamenco and hip-hop, we see an association with a specific ethnic group that was marginalised, that now objectively has the same rights as the rest of the population. However, momentum, more than anything else, means that macro-level statistics regarding education, earnings, crime are all worse for this ethnic group, and no one really knows what to do about this. In the USA, in Spain, also in the 1980s, the moment when the genre in question found a global audience was also the moment when a drug epidemic ravaged the community in question, the wounds of which are still very sore for many people. And from that moment, we see a profound distrust of the authorities, a certain paranoia that this was done deliberately by the man at top who hates us to try and wipe us out. In the modern context, the nation in question, Spain and the USA, have embraced and accepted these music genres, and members of other ethnic groups avidly consume hip-hop songs, flamenco songs, and that creates a bit of tension. This sense that some people exhibit, not everybody of course, that this music is from our ethnic group, it's from us, we made it. Many performers struggle to forgive members of ethnic groups whose ancestors were the beneficiaries of an unfair society. And of the two music genres, one is the powerful, passionate music that emerged as the creative release for the torment and helplessness felt by the abused and exploited lowest stratum of society that only gained legal equality in the mid-20th century. The other is hip-hop. We've come to the end of the episode, and I feel it only fitting if I were to share with you a few of my favourites that hopefully you can go and explore and add to your playlists. Where do we start? We have to begin with Camarón de la Isla. This guy is the Don, the Elvis, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Miles Davis, the Frank Sinatra of flamenco. Died in 1992 at age only 42 of cancer. Apparently over 100,000 were at his funeral. The next two I would recommend are both tocadores, they're both guitarists. We have Francisco Sanchez Gomez, aka Paco de Lucia, the godfather of flamenco guitar playing. He was aged only 15 when he went on his first global tour, and probably the first star in the modern era of flamenco to experiment with making the music or combining the music with other genres, with new instruments, with new playing formats, with new broadcasting formats. He really went there for the first time. His counterpart, Tomatito, of the same vintage, of the same era, also a very, very talented guitarist. They collaborated a lot. He had less global fame, but his back catalogue is enormous, and you will love exploring Tomatito's work on a rainy evening with something nice to drink, I promise you. The final two I would like to draw your attention to, we have Diego Carrasco, the flamenco experimentalist. Diego Carrasco is Jerez de la Frontera Gitano through and through, but there is a huge amount of exploration in his repertoire. He knows how to perform flamenco. This guy ain't a fraud. This is flamenco jondo, but in his music you can hear big band sounds. There's a lot of piano you can hear influences from Latin America, from Cuba, from Argentina. You can hear that in his work, whilst he still remains faithful to flamenco. He's also very playful. He did a cover of Ase de He, Ja de He, which I absolutely adore, by the way. Check that one out. And the future of flamenco, I'm going to go with Maria Jose Yergo. She is a gitana from Pozo Blanco, which is a small town in Córdoba province, I think. She's a cantor, a singer, a vocalist. She has incredible vocal control. This girl can sing. It's cante jondo over deep, melancholy backing music, which it's not pop. It's not supposed to be pop. It's not supposed to be something to dance to. It is something to feel. It is emotive, and she really does have her own style, which, with excellent music production, I adore her music. Maria Jose Yergo, check her out. We come to the end of the episode. Thank you so much. If you've gotten this far, thank you for listening. Give us a like, a follow, subscribe. But I would like to say it is an honour for me to be able to talk about this topic. Flamenco is something... I will never be an insider. I will never be a gitano. I'm not gitano. I'm white as table salt. But since first living in Andalusia, in Spain, at the age of 21, discovering this stuff and not knowing why I like it, but finding myself so compelled by everything that flamenco is, and then realising how central it is to the Andalusian identity, culture, history. It is a pleasure for me to be able to speak about it and to hopefully ignite that spark of interest in you as well. The reason why I do this podcast is this is my vehicle for me to learn about this country, and it was sooner or later I would do an episode dedicated to flamenco, and now I've done it. And I thank you so much for being there with me. The final segment, as ever, the Spanish recommendation of the week. I've got two. One would be a night out at one of my favourite bars in the world, and I have been to every single one of them. That is Tamanco el Pasaje. It is in Jerez de la Frontera. It is a place where you go and listen to flamenco jondo, live perform flamenco, drinking a glass of sherry. I adore the place. Nothing like it on planet Earth. Tamanco el Pasaje. Go there. If I was to make another recommendation, if I were to give you a particular flamenco song I want you to listen to, it is María José Yergo's Niña de las Dunas. This is the perfect example of cante jondo, cante flamenco played in a modern context. You've got one tocador, one guitarist, going away from 4 beats per bar, performing some incredible solo improv moments within the song. It's notable this was recorded in a single sitting. There's a few sloppy notes. There's a couple moments when you can hear the plucking of a string that maybe wasn't quite in the right place. It feels like a single recording, and the fact it's not overly polished adds to the air of legitimacy of this particular music. Her vocals, again, are outrageous. There's a haunting element to it, a real echo on the audio that adds suspense and mystery. Check it out. Go take a listen. Get to your local tablao as soon as possible. I'll see you there. Guys, thank you for listening. Take care. Anyway, shout out to you. Shout out to you, young man, if you're listening, which you probably are.